wheelbarrow appeared before sunrise. Nobody in Sycamore Hollow, Missouri paid it much attention at first. It was just a small figure, a 9-year-old girl in rubber boots 2 sizes too large, pushing a battered green wheelbarrow along the gravel shoulder of County Road 12. She wasn't headed to school. She wasn't playing. She was stopping at every property along the lane, peering behind barns, scanning fence lines, and loading something into that wheelbarrow that most people in this valley had already thrown away. Her first stop was the Garner farm. Their compost pile sat slumped against a fence post at the field's edge. Denny Garner had declared it ruined back in September. Too wet, gone black in the wrong way. He'd shoveled it out there just to get it off his land. The girl crouched beside it, pressed a handful between her fingers, brought it to her nose, and nodded. Then she loaded it, scoop by careful scoop, into the wheelbarrow. Denny Garner watched from his kitchen window. He called his wife in to look. She watched for a moment, then laughed, a short, baffled sound, and went back to the stove. Denny laughed too. He picked up the phone and called his neighbor just to tell him about it. By mid-morning, the story of the little girl with the wheelbarrow full of rotten compost had moved through Sycamore Hollow the way all good stories do, with laughter attached. By the time the wheelbarrow reached the Callaway land, the girl's own family farm, it was loaded, heavy, and dark. Her boots were caked to the knee, and she wore the focused expression of someone who understood something that no one around her did yet. Her father, Dale Callaway, watched her wheel past the barn. He looked at the load. He looked at his daughter. Then he went back inside to drink his coffee before the day started. Nobody knew what she was planning. Not her parents, not the neighbors, not even Wren Callaway herself could fully explain it yet. But she had seen something the grown-ups had stopped bothering to look at. If you love stories that prove wisdom grows from the most unexpected places, subscribe and join our community. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story reaches. Sycamore Hollow sat at the bottom of a shallow valley in southern Missouri, where the Ozark foothills flattened into wide farmland. In October, the fields turned the color of old straw. Silos rose above the tree lines. The mornings smelled of wood smoke, diesel, and turned earth. The Callaway farm had been in the family for 4 generations. 60 acres of row crops, corn, then soybeans, then corn again. Dale Callaway worked the way his father had worked. Early mornings, few words, hands that never looked entirely clean. His wife, Patrice, kept a kitchen garden near the back door. Tomatoes, peppers, a long row of pole beans, and somehow always managed to pull a decent harvest from ground that gave the larger fields increasingly little. Patrice noticed things. So did her daughter. Wren was 9. She was not a prodigy. She was quiet, watchful, and stubborn in the particular way of children who have not yet learned to accept "that's just how it is" as a satisfying answer. To understand why Wren Callaway was pushing a wheelbarrow through the hollow before sunrise that October morning, you have to go back to the summer before it. Something had changed in the land around Sycamore Hollow. Dale had watched his yields slide for 3 straight seasons. His corn came in nearly 18 bushels per acre, below the county average. His soybeans nodulated poorly. The roots weren't fixing nitrogen the way healthy plants should. He applied more fertilizer. The yields didn't respond. In August, Sandra Pruitt, the county extension agent, drove out and walked the rows. She crouched, dug her hand into the earth, pressed soil in her palm. "Compaction here," she said quietly. "And here." She stood. "Dale, your organic matter is low. Years of tillage and synthetic inputs have depleted the microbial life. The soil structure is breaking down. Rain runs off instead of soaking in." "So what do I do?" he asked. "You can keep feeding the crop," Sandra said, "or you can start feeding the soil. Those aren't the same thing." Dale nodded. But feeding the soil was a slow game, and the bills came due on a fixed calendar. A few weeks before that October morning with the wheelbarrow, Wren had been crouching behind her grandfather's barn when she first saw it. Earl Callaway, Dale's father, retired now, living in the smaller house at the back of the property, had kept a compost pile for decades. Coffee grounds, eggshells, vegetable peelings, dry leaves, grass clippings. He turned it every few weeks. When the bottom finished breaking down, the material that came out was dark, crumbly, and sweet-smelling. He called it his black gold. Wren was watching earthworms move through a finished section when she noticed the difference. Her grandfather's compost was alive. Worms threading through it, fine white fungal filaments tracing through the structure like something had been quietly building a network underground for months. "Grandpa," she said, "what makes compost good or bad?" Earl sat on an overturned feed bucket. "Browns and greens," he said. "Carbon and nitrogen. Dry leaves, straw, that's your carbon. Kitchen scraps, fresh clippings, that's your nitrogen. Too much nitrogen and it goes sour. Too much carbon and it just sits there drying out. And it needs air. Turn it. Let it breathe." "What happens when someone does it wrong?" "They give up on it," Earl said. "Dump it somewhere and call it a loss." Wren biked through the hollow that afternoon. She looked at every farm she passed, and everywhere she looked, she saw abandoned compost piles, left too wet, never turned, never finished. Material everyone had given up on. She spent 2 evenings at the county library. She borrowed books from Sandra Pruitt, who seemed surprised and quietly pleased that a 9-year-old was asking about soil biology. She read about carbon to nitrogen ratios, about thermophilic bacteria, the microbes that heat a compost pile past 130 degrees and break down pathogens, about humus formation and how finished compost binds soil particles into aggregates that hold air and water simultaneously, about mycorrhizal fungi, the underground networks that extend plant root reach and deliver phosphorus in exchange for sugars. Then she went out with the wheelbarrow. Her first attempt failed completely. Wren applied the collected material to a small test bed near the kitchen garden and planted spinach seedlings. Within days, they yellowed and curled. The material she'd collected was only half finished, still actively decomposing, releasing heat and ammonia that burned the tender roots before they could establish. She went back to Earl, back to the library. She learned that immature compost competes with plants for nitrogen and scorches roots the way raw fertilizer does. The pile had to finish first. She rebuilt the collected material into new windrows behind the barn, layering wet kitchen waste with dry autumn leaves from the road ditches. She added a bucketful of finished compost from Earl's pile to inoculate the heap with active microbial life. She watered it until it felt like a wrung-out sponge. Then she checked the temperature with an old meat thermometer from the kitchen drawer. On day 3, the center read 128 degrees Fahrenheit. She turned it. By day 6, it had climbed to 141 degrees. The biology was working. The neighbors noticed the windrows near the fence line. Denny Garner asked Dale what his daughter was doing out there with a pitchfork in November. Dale said he was still working that out himself. Word moved through the hollow, the way it always does in small communities. Not unkindly, but with the particular amusement reserved for things that seem harmless but make no sense. A little girl collecting everyone's discarded compost in freezing weather. Everyone laughed. Not one of them stopped to ask her why. By February, the windrows had transformed. What had been dark, sour, half-rotted material was now uniform and crumbly. The smell of finished earth, of forest floor after rain. Wren dug into the base and found it threaded with white mycelium, visible fungal colonies that had moved in from the surrounding soil. Earthworms had settled into the bottom layers. She applied the finished compost to her test bed in late February. 3 inches worked gently into the surface and waited through the last frost. In April, she planted tomatoes, beans, and 2 short rows of corn from the same seed bag as Dale's main planting. By June, the difference was visible to anyone who looked. The plants in Wren's bed were a shade of green so deep it looked almost blue. When she dug carefully into the soil, alongside one tomato plant to expose the roots, something Earl had suggested, what she found was dense and white, and reaching in every direction. Sandra Pruitt came out in early July. She crouched beside the bed for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked up at Dale. The finished compost improved soil aggregation, she said, better pore structure, improved water retention. The microbial activity released nutrients slowly in forms the roots could actually use. She paused. The roots went looking and found something worth finding. Late July in Sycamore Hollow was usually a season of modest expectations. Not on Wren's test bed. The tomatoes came in heavy and firm. The beans were dense on the vine. The 2 short rows of corn, identical seed to Dale's main field, produced ears Sandra measured at nearly 28% above the field average, in both weight and kernel density. Denny Garner came across the fence to look, and stood at the edge of that small plot for a long time. What did she actually do? He asked Dale. Dale was quiet for a moment. She fed the soil, he said. Not the plant, the soil. By afternoon, others had made their way across the fence line too, the same neighbors who had laughed at her windrows in November, now standing quietly at the edge of a 10-foot plot, hands in their pockets, shaking their heads. Not in dismissal this time, in honest wonder. Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer and philosopher who spent his life studying what nature accomplishes without interference, once wrote that the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. Wren Calloway had not read Fukuoka, but that summer, standing at the edge of a 10-foot test bed in her grandfather's oversized rubber boots, she had arrived at that same understanding by a different road. By August, 3 neighboring farms had asked Wren to walk their fields and look at their soil. She was 10 now, carrying a spiral notebook she'd started in March. She spoke about carbon ratios and microbial inoculation with the easy fluency of someone who had learned through failure as much as study. Sandra Pruitt invited her to speak at the county extension fall meeting. Earl sat in the front row and said nothing, but the look on his face needed no translation. Denny Garner stopped Dale at the mailbox one afternoon. "I thought she was collecting garbage," he said. Dale almost smiled. "She was," he said. "She just knew it wasn't garbage anymore." The real harvest that summer was never the tomatoes or the corn. It was the proof, patient, stubborn, quietly earned, that what gets discarded is rarely worthless, that the soil beneath our feet is not a surface to be farmed upon, but a living system to be tended, that the greatest tools a farmer can carry cost nothing: curiosity, observation, and the willingness to look carefully at what everyone else has already walked past. Waste becomes value in the right hands, and the greatest harvest always begins far beneath the surface. What lesson stayed with you from Wren's story? Leave it in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. These stories remind us that wisdom travels quietly and finds people who are ready for it. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and join our community. We'll see you in the next one.